back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It is positively the sunny time. I take a lot of pictures out my window here, of happy moments at Baltimore Positive. This picture's a little older because it still has the crane up over my shoulder here, but I figured I would go with the July rainbow for Don Mohler. Welcome to the Recon. The Recon is brought to you by all of our sponsors, but of course, our friends over at State Fair. We're firing up the hot dog eating over the weekend. They had the Catonsville parade on the 4th of July. I made it over to the Heritage Fair on Saturday. I made it to Meriwether Post Pavilion to have an ice cold beer with Ray Bachman, my former producer. It has been a glorious week. I spent 2 hours and 32 minutes with Bruce Springsteen on Broadway in New York Thursday night after eating my face off in New York for 2 days. Don, we walked 25 miles. A lot has happened since the last time you and I got together with County Executive Barry Glassman on Friday. It's been very things are happening again, like normal life, right?
Oh, it absolutely. Coming off the 4th, my daughter commented, Catonsville had their celebration, as did many. Dundalk, the parades, many of the parades were on the 3rd. And my daughter commented that just driving around Catonsville early that morning, you could feel the joy. You could feel it in the air. I noticed that my son, Jeff, Mohler and Gary Realtors, posted it was his favorite day of the year. And then later on the 3rd, my brother came back to the house. I walked up and down Montrose Avenue with the parade. I didn't go down to Frederick Road. He said he thought it was one of the biggest crowds he'd ever seen in his lifetime. So it was clear to me, Nestor, that people were ready to just celebrate being together. And I think I don't want to be too Pollyannish about it. I mean, I want you to react because you were at the famous Heritage Fair. There is so much good. And I think that when people just put aside all the silliness and all the madness and all the Marjorie Taylor Greene loony bin stuff and just come together as friends and neighbors, that's when we really see what we can do if we put our minds to it in the United States of America.
Well, Don, I mean, there's so much going on here. I mean, I spent a couple of days in New York walking 25 miles through the biggest city in, our country. We would say one of the greatest cities in the world. And what the plague has done to it. I don't know what the plague has done to Paris or, anywhere else for that matter. I mean, I guess in places like Australia and New Zealand, they shut the country down, keeping it together. They have huge problems in India right now. What's going on in other places in the world? But I witnessed New York trying to come back and what it looks like right now after knowing what it's looked like the last 35 years. I've been going to New York since 1986. And I always tell my wife about how scared I was the first time I went, that I put the dresser in front of the door of my hotel room in September of 1986. And, people and look, the Fox News talking points and the whole right side of everything's awful because we have a Democratic president, like all of that. I just judge it with my eyes and I say, what are the problems here? And what are the challenges, the real challenges, not PRing it up, but going back to New York and seeing half of it out of business. Now, the half that is in business, still fine. Every other store's still there. It's not like whole blocks of blight or anything like that. It's just whole blocks that used to be fully lit up that are only half open. And in the other half, there are homeless people sleeping in the alcoves. Everywhere. Pick a street, any street. It's everywhere. And it's also that the international tourists that you're used to seeing there, international people are gone. A lot of the hustle
now that
and bustle
itself
gone.
is strange. That would, Nestor, it's interesting that you mentioned that because that would feel strange because that's such a part, right, of the fabric of New York. I'll be going soon. And I'll look for that. That's fascinating that you point that out, that the international flavor of the city, because of the pandemic, is not there.
No one can get in, no one can get out, right? So, and that comes home as a hockey fan when I watch the Canadians play in front of like a quarter of their fans in the Stanley Cup final. You know, you put that game on and most of the seats are empty, quite frankly. Not half. It looked like less than half, right? And you go to New York and the city's kind of half. But I'll say this, the restaurants there, good service, good food, like the places that stayed open feel functional. It's different here, Don. I've gone out to a lot of places here locally that aren't that made it through the pandemic but are struggling. I went out and had barbecue on Sunday at a place where they microwaved my barbecue. Like a place that I've been before that's a legitimate place. I'm not going to out it. It's not in the city, it's out in the suburbs. And like service that struggled. They can't get help. It was the 4th of July. The server was frustrated. It looked like a Restaurant Impossible episode, like where everything was going wrong, like almost like the Can of Camera sign was going to stop and they were going to stop the movie and say, let's fix everything here. I think that this transition for a lot of society, for a lot of business, we talk about how employers are having trouble finding people to take jobs and whatnot. This is a different struggle for politicians. And as I look to the Crab Cake Tour, and I know you had a big weekend with a lot of folks stop by your house, and you had a lot of off the record conversations and a lot of people that are hopeful and they're running on policies and stuff. This is going to be a great conversation for you and me over the next year as to what gets our society, not Baltimore County, not for Johnny O or for Stuart Pittman down in G&M or for Barry Glassman on the other side of the table up in Bel Air, but for the whole society to pull this thing together. Because when I see New York hurting, I know we're going to have issues in this country about infrastructure, building things up. We talk about the thing falling, that tragedy down in Florida. A lot of things that are happening that are going to take leadership. And New York is front and center for me because I was there last week. And we talk about what Brandon does here, and we talk to other leaders. This is a time for leadership in this country, Don.
Oh, I no doubt about it, and I think we'll see it at all levels. You know, it's interesting, and we'll chat a little bit about the Crab Cake Tour coming together. You've made several stops already. The folks up at Barrett's on the Pike could not have been nicer. Paul Silverman, the manager up there, opened his arms to County Executive Glassman, you and me. And as you said, we're not. You're going to do most of the Crab Cake tours. I'm going to.
Every business is going to have a story.
You said everyone's going to have a story. Everyone's going to be different. And we're not going to rate one against the other. But you said to me off the air, and I agree, I would say to folks, if you haven't been to Barrett's on the Pike, that's a pretty darn good crab cake.
Did
folks.
you have the soup?
I've had it before. I'm very familiar.
Right, because you went Hunt Valley.
I'm very, very familiar with their corn chowder crab soup. It's spectacular. As I joked that day on the show, when we used to have events there, I could always count on my staff coming with me to Barrett's because they loved that soup. But, you know, we sat for almost an hour, 3 different segments with County Executive.
It was actually an hour and 11 minutes, but I didn't keep count.
Hour and 11 minutes. And really, you know, people will sometimes jump us about being Democratic centric. And again, I repeat, we've invited Governor Hogan. We'll continue to do so, and would be very fair if Kiefer and the gang, Mike Ricci and others, can get him on. But, you know, County Executive Glassman is an outstanding individual. He's an outstanding public servant. He was great in the General Assembly. He's been an outstanding county executive, and he's running for controller to be the Republican candidate for controller. Followed that up with, because my home happens to be on the parade route, number of elected officials and folks who want to be governor stopping by the House over the weekend. You know, Senator Van Hollen stopped by, Delegate Brooke Learman, who's running for controller on the Democratic side, obviously County Executive Johnny O, gubernatorial candidates Tom Perez and Westmore, and a lot of the folks who were at my house, it's a cast of thousands on the 4th, were commenting just what good people these folks were. And that's what I say. That's what you started, Nestor, by saying how important it is to get out of that, what I'll call that Fox News, OAN echo chamber, and just step back and say, look, there are some it's really easy to want to say, elected officials, they're all on the take, they all stink there. And that's just never been, I think I've said this to you before ad nauseum. That has never been my experience. My experience has been whether you're on the Republican side of the aisle or the Democratic side of the aisle, whether you're a Republican like Barry Glassman or Baltimore County Councilman David Marks, or you're Johnny O and Chris Van Hollen on the Democratic side, or Dutch, I can go down the list. These are just good people, families like you and me, trying to make the country work better. And if the Independence Day celebrations allow us to step back and say, you know what, we really don't hate each other as much as we think we do. There was a great moment where my brother has a really close friend who is a big time MAGA individual over here in Catonsville. And my brother saw him out in the street and he went and he brought him in. And there were a bunch of the Democrats standing around. And he brought him over and they joked and laughed and said, here's a member of the other team. And I thought, this is what we have to be able to do more. We don't have to agree on policy, but we don't have to be Marjorie Taylor Greene, Laura Bobart crazy, Paul Gosar crazy. We don't have to do that. And the less we do of that, the better we'll be. But, you mentioned New York. I want to talk with you, Marv Albert. I want to talk Bruce. You had seen, for those of our listeners out there who may, for whatever reason, not be aware, about 3 years ago, Bruce Springsteen decided basically to take his life story, sort of one of his books, and put it on Broadway in a one-man show, 2.5 hours. I told you I haven't seen it in person. I've seen it on Netflix. Linda and I had the same comment, and now I'm going to turn to you. We watched it on Netflix, and Nestor, it's so emotionally draining, not only for the viewer, but I imagine for the boss. I don't see how he does it night after night to that emotional level. You're in the theater. Take our listeners inside the theater to that show and what you experience, you and Jen, when you're there.
Well, I mean, I've seen Bruce 100 times, like all over the world, and I've taken a picture with him now, right? I've carried him through the pit. I've asked a question at a international press conference on live TV, right? So I don't, other than having his guitar on my wall, which I wouldn't care about, other than having the ability to sit down and chat with him for 20 minutes like Barack Obama did, there's not much for me. There's not a club he can play in or seeing him at Asbury Park at the Stone Pony or whatever that would be any better or worse than even the DVDs are. I mean, during this period of time, my wife went away about 2 months ago with her family, and I crank up music and I work, that. And I put on the Springsteen Barcelona Rising tour from 2002-3 era. And I saw him perform a song on there that I've seen him perform a million times, but it caught me the right way that day. And I'm like, my God, that's incredible. And it's just something on TV. So you don't have to be in the room with him to feel it. But I'd say this, the first time I saw him, I felt like I paid too much money for the show. So that colored how I felt about it. And I had just read the book. So I read the book. We went to New York. It was a big night out. I was a little disappointed by it because I sort of knew the punchline a little bit. I had read the book and I felt like it was book centric. It was him reading the cliff notes of the book and strumming the guitar, which is always beautiful. It was a great night. I'm all for it. But my wife loved it. Like my wife, she didn't read the book. So my wife saw it for the first time that night. And she was like, oh, and my wife's seen Bruce everywhere and has carried him through the pit. And she was sitting next to me when I asked the question. Like, so all of that, right? But she loved it the first time. And I left a little like, it was awesome. It was great. It was magical, but I wish it was more magical for me. I wish I didn't read the book is how I felt. So 3.5 years passes. And 3.5 weeks ago, he decides to reenact this thing. I never watched the Netflix special. He performed it 230 some times. I think the night that you saw it was probably after he had done it 100 times. I think he finally captured it. It was well into the run that he videoed it. He famously kept it the exact same every night to win the Tony. So any show you saw was the same show it had to be. So that being said, I wound up getting tickets 4 weeks ago completely by accident. I didn't know they were going on sale. My friend Bill Yerman, a lot of you may remember Bill as a sponsor here at Continental Title, and maybe people know Bill. Bill texted me and said, "Hey, Bruce, tickets are going on sale in 5 minutes. Are you going to try to get them?" And I'm like, I forgot about it. I went in and I got tickets. So now I got tickets. We're going back. I thought I was seeing the same show, Don. A show that I loved but didn't need to see again. I didn't even try to see it again because it was expensive and I didn't want to do it. Now there's been a plague. I've been at home for a year and a half. I'm sitting on tickets. I'm excited about going to New York. It's a different theater. I thought I was seeing the same show and I didn't read any of the reviews. The day before the show last week, I went on to Backstreets and I saw too much. I saw that 2 of the songs were taken out. Brilliant disguise. He took it out of the show. I'm like, now one of the things I love about it's gone. But I'm like, it's Bruce. We'll figure it out. The one thing I caught on the review was the show's completely different. And I turned to my wife on the bus on the way up there and I'm like, the show's completely different. So that got me excited. Went into the theater. It's New York. All the what I've told you, we were in New York 2 days. This was the end of the second day that we went to see Bruce. It was raining. And we got over there and I found my seat in the mezzanine and I planted myself down. I tried to get my head right to okay, I'm going to sit with Bruce after having gone through this plague. He's gone through this plague. I wonder how this is going to go. And the lights came down. Don, I cried. I sobbed 3 times. The show's different. Some of the stories are the same. Some of the endings are a little different. He's added tons of stuff. He's added a couple songs. He's added a thing with Patty that's different. He's added a different ending. He doesn't do Born to Run for the first time that I could ever remember, that he's just done with it. And I walked out of that theater and Don, the first thing I said is, I got to go back. I got to come back and see it again.
Wow. Well, what's the best moment in the show?
Him talking about his mother, and his mother's still alive and is now 5 years further removed into dementia. And it's so powerful, I'll cry talking about it. I've lost my mother since the last time I saw him, right? So it's just that life brings you along the highway, and now all of a sudden you're in the room with this guy who's you've been in a room with for alone and in the past, and you're seeing where he is and you're seeing where you are. Simple as that.
It sounds magical, and I thought, you can't replicate it in a Netflix special, but I found that when I saw
you
it.
love Broadway.
Oh, I love Broadway. I mean,
you love that part of lights,
I love
stage,
live
detachment,
theater.
the theater of all of it.
I can still my my brother and sister-in-law and Linda and I went not long after Hamilton became a thing. We were fortunate enough to see Lin-Manuel Miranda, and we weren't able to sit together, so we were in different parts of the theater. And I can remember saying, I'm really worried that I'm going to be let down because nothing can be as spectacular as this thing has been built up to be. And 5 minutes into the show, you're going, oh my God, I'm in something special. And at intermission, I can still see my brother running across the theater, simply going, oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, that's how it is. And that's what live theater
I had an oh my God with Bruce the other night.
Can be. There you go. What was it?
No, just
right.
The whole experience of all of it. And the fact that he's the only show on Broadway. We walked right. We walked right. 8 blocks. We walked from 36th to 44th Street. There's nothing going on in New York. Yeah, the Billy Joel song, the Night the Lights Went Out on Broadway, all of that, Seen the Lights Go Out on Broadway. And
pretty fitting, right? Theater, pretty fitting.
Well, with very measured expectations for me. I lowered my expectations for what I was going to get. And Bruce, because he's effing Bruce, is just going to over-deliver that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, greatness is – that's why I always say to people, Nestor, that's why in sports, in entertainment, in politics, I root for greatness. I like greatness, and Bruce is greatness. My sister in law reached out a week or two ago, and she said, "Elton John's coming to the Garden. What do you think?" And I said, "Is that a real question?" I mean, like, of course, greatness. If I get a chance to see greatness in the Garden, assuming it doesn't break the bank, let's see what we can do. Hey, listen, before we rock and roll and move on, give us one of the greats, Nestor, and you have so many connections to this guy. But those of us who have loved sports, watched sports, listened to sports for decades, we, I grew up with Marv Albert. You know Marv, you know his son Kenny. Give me
I
some
don't know
reflections.
Marv.
I thought you did know Marv.
I don't. I had an encounter with Marv. I've had a couple of encounters with Marv, but I don't know Marv. But Marv is at like the root. Probably the greatest story I can ever tell on the radio involves Marv Albert because it involves like the beginning of my career.
Well,
You don't
let's
know this story? I've never told you the Marv Albert story.
crank it. It seems very appropriate in a week
Well,
where
I mean,
Marv
you were
says
in my
he's
life at
hanging it
this
up.
time, right? So my 30th anniversary on the air is December 13th. I walked into the studio. It was Kenny Albert, Jerry Coleman, and they had taken over for a guy named Benny the Fan. And before that was Charlie Ekman. It was at WITH. And the reason Kenny was, and I've talked to Kenny, and
I,
you can go
I
archive all this.
remember Benny the Fan as a young, very, very well.
Okay, so you have a vibe that WITH was a big band radio station with two younger guys that were trying to like breathe it back to life in 1991. They had the Skipjacks games, right? The Skipjacks ran on WITH. They brokered 7 to 10 p.m. to run the games, right? And Kenny was the voice of the Baltimore Skipjacks, fire on ice. And Barry Trotz was the coach. I was in my sixth or seventh year of covering the Skipjacks from the time they were Penguins to Capitals. And this was at the end of the Capitals run, 90-91, before the Bandits came, about 2 years later, 93-94. So Kenny's doing the games, and he was sort of their quasi PR assistant guy too. And that's kind of like how minor league sports worked, right? So Kenny says to me, "Nestor, you want to do color for me on the radio?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know Gene Ubriaco was doing the color, still living in town, wasn't coaching the team anymore. And nights when Gene wasn't doing it, Kenny said, "Do you want to do it?" I knew nothing about color. I knew nothing about radio. I was a sports writer. All I ever wanted to do was be a writer. And I sit in with Kenny, and I did color for some of the games. And I knew a lot about the team. I covered the team. So I was a good color announcer. So Kenny comes to me and says, "Do you want to do sports radio? I'm doing a show." And I'm like, "Okay, WITH." I said, "I don't know if I know enough about sports, but I'll try." So I went down to the studio in December 13th, and I sat in a studio where when I sat down, Kenny put a headset on me, and Kenny was the host. "Welcome to Sports Forum with Kenny Albert, sitting in tonight, Nestor Aparicio, Jerry Coleman, whatever," and we would do our thing. And then the next week, Kenny's like, "Well, why don't you sit in on Monday and have Jerry Thursday?" So it just became me and Kenny. And once or twice, Jerry and I did it. I almost killed him. And then in January, so this will tell you the time. It was 92. Kenny's father came down to see Kenny do a game and hang out with Kenny. It was on a Friday, and this is in January, February, 6, 8 weeks into this. Kenny says, "Nestor, my dad's coming in on Friday night. You should come down and do the show that night." And I'm like, "Kenny, I get to meet Marv Albert, your dad? That'd be great." So I go down to, it was 5 Light Street, above where the McDonald's is. It's now like a
Sure.
big condo complex, 5 Light Street, right at Light in Baltimore. And this building was just awful. I mean, it was everything about it was 1955, was falling apart. We had a homeless man for the doorman, like literally. Um, and I go down that night. Don, I'm not kidding you. I'm being honest. I had done radio maybe 8 to 10 times. I had sat in with Kenny doing a 2-hour call-in show where we didn't have a lot of calls because we didn't have a lot of audience, right? And on this particular Friday, the premise was Kenny's dad was coming down, taking the train. He was going to come and sit in on our show and then go with Kenny to the game. And then they were going to have dinner and have breakfast. And then Marv was, Kenny was, this was you visiting your granddaughter
Sure.
for college. You were just visiting, right? I swear to God, it's a Friday night. It's 12 degrees outside. It's dead of winter. I'm 8 weeks into my radio career. I'm not even Nasty Nestor. I'm just Nestor Aparicio, sports reporter from the Baltimore Evening Sun. And we were trying to do it straight. You know, we're doing New York style radio. Marv shows up with Kenny at whatever, 4:30. Total Walt Frazier mink coat, okay? Because it's cold out. Completely manicured. I mean, his fingernails were
Damn,
like
Marv. Go Marv.
Marv shows up, tubes all
Superfly.
fit.
You're telling me
Everything's
Marv was
perfect.
doing a little Superfly.
This is 1992, Marv. This is before the incident and all that, right? This is Marv Albert. Yes. This is Marv Albert calling.
Yes.
There's barely cable television, right? Marv Albert's the voice of the NBC baseball. He's the voice of the NBA. He's the voice of the Rangers and the Knicks. So I mean, like,
are we talking? Do you believe in miracles?
no, that was Al Michaels.
Michaels, right? This is
Michaels.
Albert. That was Michaels. Good.
So
right. I
Clyde
always get them
from
confused.
downtown. Yes. So
Yes.
that's who. So this is Marv Albert, and I'm Little Nasty Nestor. It's 1992. And this is Kenny's dad, so I'm not trying to be a jerk. And I wasn't starstruck. I had been around Marv. Marv had been in the dining room with me at a Capitals game a dozen times. So I'm not starstruck like that at all. I mean, it was kind of neat, you know? And I'm sitting in the corner like, what am I going to say to make this more interesting as a show? And we're in this little cubby hole. Like, I cannot impress to you, Don, what this studio looked like. There were cigarettes and ashtrays. It just was gnarly as hell. It was dirty, awful. Okay? So Marv's sitting down in this manicured
Is that where
studio.
we did the frenzy?
Yes, you had been there.
Muir, Cap, you and me.
1,000,000%. Tell everybody about your memories of that studio, Don.
Oh, it was, like you said, it was a dingy, it was not upscale. It was not the Ritz. Let's put it that way.
I'm trying to explain this to you, and you actually remember it.
Oh, yeah. Cap and Muir and I were up there. And actually,
1,000,000%.
I had a doctor the other day say to me, who's friends with Dave Muir, he said, were you part of the Friday Frenzy with Nestor and Dave back
30
in the
years
day?
ago.
And I said, guilty as charged. We would climb up the top of Light Street and we would do the Friday Frenzy.
So, Don, you're going to appreciate this because I'm the captain of the ship here. And I always, there was something very, very comforting about doing radio with Kenny Albert as the sidekick. I was just like the expert from the paper that was just the poop stirrer. And again, we were doing radio for 6 weeks. This was like Wayne's World, like totally not anything. Kenny's trying to do it or whatever. So, and Kenny was doing it like his dad would do it. He was just doing New York style sports radio. So Marv sits down, and I'll never forget this. Kenny's here, Marv's here, I'm here. Kenny, at the end of the first hour, it's 5:55. We threw to the network. No, I'm wrong. I mean, I'm going to get the whole story right. Kenny stayed the first segment to the half an hour because the game was at 7:05, okay, or 7:35. Kenny had to walk from 5 Light Street to the Royal Farms Arena, then the Baltimore Arena. It was the Civic Center. So Kenny had to walk 3 blocks, go up the elevator, get all the equipment set up for the game. He was calling the game that night, okay? So I want to make this clear. Kenny was calling the hockey game. His dad was coming down to do sort of the radio show we did pregame and then go to the game with Kenny. I had never done sports radio in my life. I want you, just so it's hard for you to get your arms around that, but I had never done this before, and I was frightened, terrified. So Marv's in the studio. Kenny's in the studio. Kenny gets up at the end of the first segment, puts his jacket on, says, Dad, I'll meet you up there. And Marv's like, all right, Kenny. Kenny leaves. Fred Robinson was running the board. Fantastic. Rockin' Robin. Rockin' Robin cues the comeback in. Marv looks at me. I look at Marv, and like Marv thinks I'm a radio guy. I'm not. Well, welcome back to the Sports Forum with Kenny Albert. I'm Marv. Nestor Aparicio's here. Nestor, I hear you're a cousin to Luis. So Marv talks to me for whatever, 10 minutes. The phone's ringing off the hook because the great Marv Albert's there. Let's go take a call from Marv. Hey, Marv, I'm up. I remember you with the call in the Bullets game. Like whatever. We do a segment. I'm there with Marv. I'm very comfortable. I mean, I'm with Marv Albert. What could go wrong? Rockin' Robin's running the board. I got professionals all around me. I'm a radio guy. Top of the hour comes. I swear to God, Marv reached for his fur coat and put it on. And I was like, you can't leave.
Where you going, dude?
Dude, you can't leave. And I'm like, Mr. Albert, you can't leave me. I don't know what I'm doing. No, I'm like, no, you can't leave. It was like that. It was like, no, Mr. Albert, you can't leave me. I don't know what I'm doing, man. Like, please don't leave me. Kenny's up there. You don't need to go see Kenny. I need you more than Kenny needs you.
Kenny will be fine.
Kenny will be fine. Kenny's up eating death dogs at 6:25. Marv, if you go up there, people are going to want autographs. There's nowhere to hide. It's a horrible building. I was there with Walt, with Clyde. Can you stay one more segment, Marv? Marv, don't leave me. Teach me how to do this. Just give me 20 more minutes. Don't leave me. Marv Albert, I walked to the door. I walked down the hallway begging him to stay. Like, I'm not making this up for like I literally was frightened that he was leaving. And I like almost grabbed his arm. Nestor, you'll be fine. I have faith in you. And he walked out.
He threw you. So here's the bottom line.
No, here's the funniest thing.
Marv threw you in the deep end.
1,000,000%.
And you learned.
And this might be where you come in, or your brother, because your brother was talking to me about Moosehead then and like sponsoring the show, and I was trying to make my way. It was before that. It's before I knew your brother, though. This was just you. I literally, and this is Scout's honor, I swear on my life, I was panicked. And it was 5:59 or whatever, and I had like 7 minutes through the break to go through the AP News and like all of that. And then I was going to have to come back on with a live mic at like 6:07, and I was going to have to make it from like 6:07 to 7 o'clock when the pregame show. And I think Marv was going to be the pregame guest on Kenny's show or whatever,
sure.
Do 12 minutes or whatever. And I went into the bullpen and I did what I watched Kenny do. I didn't know anything about producing a radio show at all. I had watched Kenny call people to try to get them on the show as a guest because we didn't have callers at 481-1230. We didn't have listeners. We didn't even have a show. It was like 8 weeks old. It was nothing. And I called Mike Fountain. I called John Keller. I called Kevin Eck. I probably called Bill Swish Morrison. I probably called you because it was numbers I had. There were no cell phones. It was 1992.
Sure.
I said to John Keller, call in at 6:10. I said to Mike Fountain, call in at 6:30. I said to Kevin Eck, call in at 6:45. I probably begged you to do like.
Yeah, I probably remember. I mean, I remember some of those calls, so I don't remember that day, obviously. Because
Can you be on the show that day
sure,
like that?
Yeah,
right?
I'll call in. Why not? I'm
that
sitting
hour.
Here.
I did 3 phone calls with John Keller.
Was this 92? So I was.
This is February of 92.
All right, so I'm probably hanging. I'm the principal at Sparrows Point Middle, and I'm probably getting ready to do some night activity and having a cheesesteak from
you didn't answer
Captain
the phone.
Harvey.
I probably called 744-88, whatever it was, and got the answering machine. Right?
I was in the middle of Captain Harvey's cheesesteak.
So Marv leaves. I had to come in and like do it. I had never done it. I had never dreamed of doing it. I had never thought of doing it ever in my life. I had no aspiration to be a sports radio show host. I was scared shitless. I mean, the only time I could even tell you I was that frightened was the day the national radio, when I flew to Chicago and I went on national radio. I had been doing regular radio for 7 years, and I was frightened. Like American Idol, Sing for Your Song, Lights Are On, frightened. And Marv Albert left me. And I've only spoken to Marv Albert one other time in my life. I walked into the Pittsburgh William Penn Hotel, 96, 97, in that range, early Ravens. And I walked into the coffee shop on a Sunday morning. The Ravens were playing the Steelers, and I think Marv had the game. So it was still when NBC had football.
Right.
So this is March Abroda was the coach, just before Billick, for sure. So it was 97, 6, 7, 8 was one of those days.
Vinny Testaverde time.
It may have been 97 when they played a night game, because it was a morning that I ran into Marv in a coffee shop, getting a coffee, and he had the same mink coat on in Pittsburgh, right? And I saw him in the coffee shop, and I went up and I said, Marv, I'm Nestor Aparicio. Kenny said, oh, Nestor, how are you?
How'd your career go, buddy? Once I threw you in that deep end, did you do the backstroke?
I totally said to him, I will never, ever forget, forgive, or be able to appreciate you enough that you literally threw me off the pier and made me swim.
Well,
and here I am 30 years later.
Boom.
Marv is finally retiring, and that is my whole Marv Albert story. I've never talked to Kenny about Marv ever again, other than when he's been on the show. Kenny doesn't remember the story. Kenny doesn't remember leaving me with Marv, and I'm sure Marv doesn't remember leaving me. And Marv was convinced I could do it. Marv was Marv was like, Nestor, you're going to be fine.
Piece of cake. And Kenny's
I'm like, no, I'm not going to be fine. Please.
Nestor, you're fine.
Don, I can't begin to tell you how I begged him to stay. I'm not even being facetious. I really thought I was going to soil myself if I had to go in there and do 45 minutes of radio, man. So, I've done this American Idol thing for years and years and years, where I brought every Luke Jones, every Peter DeLutis, everybody in to do this. And I know that look of fear. And I've often said to them, Marv Albert did this to me and it worked out for me. So if I'm doing it to you and it doesn't work out for you, it's on you. It's not because at some point, you were the student teacher guy, right? At some point you had to teach the class without having anybody else in the room, right?
Without a doubt. And it is a teachable, right. I can remember teaching little children to swim at Mount St. Joe summer camp when I was a counselor in college and during my college years. And at some point, after walking them across the pool and doing the doggy paddle, you have to let go.
Well, you can't be a tadpole forever.
I can't think of a better place to end this week's edition of the Recon. We come back on the Recon next time. We're going to talk ranked choice voting. We're going to talk. There's some new analysis from Pew Research about who voted for who in the 2020 elections. Gives us some real insights, I think, about where we're going. And as always, there will be breaking news. So again, Marv Albert, thank you for taking us home on this edition of the Recon.
Well, I saw his name in the news. I'm glad I could at least tell that story to somebody other than Kenny. Don Mohler is my lifer friend. It's crazy when I start telling you stories that you were a part of. That lets me know we've been together a long time.
I remember that studio, and as I said, my doctor prompted that memory in me the other day because he's friends with Dave Muir, and he said, we have a mutual friend, and he said Dave, and I said, oh man, I love Dave, one of the all-time characters, and he said, weren't you part of the Friday football frenzy? And I said, holy mackerel, you're taking me back. So down memory lane on the Recon.
There we go. He's Don Mohler, former Baltimore County executive and my high school guidance counselor. Thursday, we are with Stuart Pittman. Anne Arundel County executive. I didn't even know G&M was in Anne Arundel County. I thought it was in Baltimore County. It's not. It's in Anne Arundel County. We're going to be there on Thursday. If you miss Barry Glassman up at Barrett's Crab Cake, don't miss the Barrett's Crab Cake on the Pike up in Bel Air as well. My wife wants to go back now all of a sudden. She didn't even like crab cakes. G&M is this week. We're going to be with Johnny O later in the month at Costas. Also going to be with Brandon Scott, our fantastic mayor at Coco's later on in the month before we get going on the full crab cake tour, which commences on August 1st in Ocean City, Maryland. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570 Tassel, Baltimore. Much love to all of our sponsors and Wise Conversations, as well as our friends on Chicken Palooza and our friends at Royal Farms. We're going to see you on the road in August doing all of the above and having a crab cake near you. We are Baltimore Positive.